On Thursday, October 3rd, 2024, at exactly 10:16 in the morning, a woman in a white cashmere coat looked at the cracked face of her grandfather's pocket watch, looked back at me, and said she would name a building after me if I could make it tick again. She meant it as a joke. Her brother laughed first. Then her assistant laughed. Then the older man in the gray suit standing near the window laughed too. But not because he thought it was funny. He laughed because he believed I was exactly what I appeared to be. A tired watch repairman from Bridgeport. A widower with oil under his thumbnail. A father who drove a 10-year-old pickup truck and wore a Navy work apron with my shop name stitched crookedly over the chest. I did not laugh. I opened the back of the watch with a case knife I had owned since I was 22, held the mechanism under the bright work lamp in her private library, and stopped moving. I knew that watch. Not the brand. Not the model. That exact watch. I had held it once before in Geneva, 14 years earlier, when I was a young apprentice working under a master horologist named Otto Weiss, before my wife got sick, before my daughter Lily was born, before I became the kind of man people looked past when they wanted to find someone important. The woman in the white coat had no idea what she had put in front of me. She thought she was asking a poor repairman to fix an old family heirloom. What she did not know was that the broken spring inside that watch was the only physical clue left in a $28 million estate fraud. And what the man in the gray suit did not know was that the repairman he had just laughed at had written the original service notes in his own hand. In 2011, on a rainy afternoon in Switzerland, beside a dying master who trusted details more than people. By the time that watch ticked again, one brother would lose his inheritance, a lawyer would lose his license, and the woman who joked about naming a building after me would learn that the smallest machine in her house had been telling the truth for years. My name is Caleb Mercer. I am 40 years old. I live with my 8-year-old daughter Lily in a 2-bedroom apartment above Mercer Time and Repair, a narrow watch shop on Fairfield Avenue in Bridgeport, Connecticut. The shop has one front window, 2 workbenches, a brass bell over the door, and a sign that says, "We repair watches, clocks, music boxes, and small mechanisms." Most people read the sign and assume I replace batteries. Sometimes I do. Sometimes I change leather straps for office workers who are late to meetings. Sometimes I repair grandmother clocks that have not run since someone's father died. But the work that keeps the lights on comes from referrals. Old mechanical watches, complicated clocks, vintage marine chronometers. Objects people bring to me because 3 jewelers have already shrugged and told them it cannot be done. On the morning this story begins, I had 3 jobs open on my bench. A 1962 Omega Seamaster with a bent balance staff, a French carriage clock from 1890 with a cracked mainspring barrel, and a 1948 Patek Philippe Calatrava that belonged to a retired judge in Fairfield who would not let anyone else touch it because, in his words, I did not talk too much. At 8:52 in the morning, my phone rang. I was holding the balance cock of the Omega in tweezers so fine a sneeze could have ruined my day. I let the call go to voicemail. 20 seconds later, it rang again. Then the shop bell rang. Mrs. Alvarez from the bakery next door stepped in, holding Lily's lunchbox. "You forgot the apple," she said. "I forgot the apple?" "You forgot the apple." From the back room, Lily called. "I noticed. Emotionally." I put the tweezers down and took the lunchbox. Lily was standing by the old regulator clock near the wall, wearing her school cardigan, one shoe tied and one shoe pretending. Her brown hair was in two uneven braids because she had insisted I could do them myself. I could not. You have everything now, I said. She opened the lunchbox and inspected it with the seriousness of a customs officer. Sandwich, crackers, apple, note? I reached into my apron pocket and handed her the folded note. She opened it. It said, "You are brave on Thursdays." She nodded. Acceptable. Mrs. Alvarez smiled, kissed the top of Lily's head, and walked her downstairs to drive her to school. Only after the door closed did I listen to the voicemail. The voice belonged to a woman named Natalie Pierce. She said she was the executive assistant to Meredith Harlow, president of the Harlow Foundation, and that Ms. Harlow had been referred to me by Judge Aaron Feld, the owner of the Calatrava, on my bench. She said Ms. Harlow had an antique pocket watch connected to her late grandfather's estate. 3 jewelers had attempted repairs. One had replaced a crystal. One had refused to open the case. One had returned the watch in worse condition than he received it. The watch had stopped at 2:17 and would not run for more than 12 minutes even after winding. That last detail made me call back. A watch that stops immediately can be broken in many ordinary ways. A watch that runs for 12 minutes and stops at the same point in its power cycle is not being difficult. It is remembering something. Natalie answered on the first ring. She asked if I could come to Greenwich that morning. I told her I normally did not make house calls unless the object was too fragile to move. She said the watch had not left the Harlow estate in 3 years, and Ms. Harlow did not want it transported until someone she trusted had inspected it. I asked what kind of watch it was. There was a pause, followed by the sound of papers moving. Swiss, Natalie said. Gold case, minute repeater, calendar. The paperwork says Weiss and Phil's, Geneva, 1904. My hand stopped on the edge of the workbench. Weiss et Fils? I asked her to repeat the name. She did. I looked toward the locked drawer beneath my bench. Inside that drawer, wrapped in cloth, was an old black notebook from Geneva. I had not opened it in almost 5 years. I told Natalie I could be there by 10. By 9:56, I was driving up a private road lined with stone walls and yellowing October trees. The Harlow estate stood on a hill above Long Island Sound. It was not a house built to impress neighbors. It was a house built by people who assumed neighbors would be impressed by existing near it. 3 stories of gray stone, black shutters, ivy climbing one side, with a circular driveway large enough to make my pickup look like a delivery mistake. A guard at the gate checked my name. A housekeeper led me through a marble hallway, past portraits of men who had never looked apologetic in their lives, and into a private library with dark wood shelves, green lamps, and a view of the water beyond the lawn. Meredith Harlow stood near the desk. She was 38, maybe 39, with dark blonde hair pulled back, a clean white coat over a navy dress, and a face that looked like it had learned to remain calm in rooms where other people tried to own the air. Beside her stood a man in a gray suit. Edward Harlow, her older brother. I recognized him from a quick search before leaving Bridgeport. 44 years old. Real estate investor. Former foundation trustee. Recently returned to Connecticut after a failed hotel development in Florida that several newspapers had called over-leveraged in language polite enough to avoid saying desperate. Near the window stood an older attorney named Malcolm Price. I recognized him too. Everyone in estate law in Fairfield County seemed to know Malcolm Price. 71, silver hair, careful voice. Law firm partner for 4 decades. The kind of man who made silence feel billable. Meredith turned when I entered. "Mr. Mercer?" "Yes." She gave me her hand. Her handshake was firm, brief, tired. Edward did not offer his hand. He looked at my apron and then at my boots. "So you are the clock man," he said. "Watchmaker," I said. "Is there a difference?" "Yes." He smiled as if I had made a small joke for him. Meredith ignored him and opened a velvet-lined box on the desk. Inside lay the pocket watch. 18-karat gold hunter case. White enamel dial. Brigade numerals. Moon phase at 6. Perpetual calendar indicators arranged with the old Swiss balance of beauty and arrogance. A minute repeater slide along the side. Weiss et Fils, Genève. My mouth went dry. The watch was not simply expensive. It was rare in a way money alone could not create. Otto Weiss had shown me the original design sketches for this series in 2010. Only 12 had been made between 1902 and 1906. Only 4 were known to survive intact. One had belonged to a shipping magnate. One to a banker in Zurich. One to a French count whose descendants fought over it until the court sealed the inventory. And one, according to Otto, had crossed the Atlantic in 1911 with an American railroad family. I looked at the engraving inside the front cover. To E. H. from A. H. Christmas 1904. My breathing changed. Not much. Enough that I noticed. Meredith saw it. Edward did too, though he did not understand what he saw. Meredith said, "Can you fix it?" I did not answer immediately. I lifted the watch with cotton gloves and held it under the lamp. The second hand rested at 217. The minute repeater slide had a tiny scratch near the groove. The case hinge had been opened recently, badly, by someone with the wrong tool. Then I saw the real problem. A mark on the inner dust cover. Not a scratch. A number. Very small. Hand-etched under the gold lip where no customer would ever notice it. OW-11-06. Otto Weiss. November 2006. A private service mark. My fingers became very still. Meredith tilted her head. "Did you find something?" Before I could answer, Edward laughed. "Meredith, don't make the poor man nervous. It is a watch, not a murder weapon." Malcolm Price smiled faintly. Meredith looked at me and made the joke that would start everything. "Fix it, Mr. Mercer, and I may have to name a building after you." Her assistant laughed softly, because assistants often laugh where power tells them to. Edward laughed louder. I did not. I opened the back case. The movement inside was not the movement that belonged in that watch. Not entirely. The plates were original. The bridges were original. The hammers for the minute repeater were original. But the calendar driving wheel had been replaced. So had one lever in the repeater mechanism. The parts had been made well enough to fool someone who repaired modern watches. But they were wrong. The finishing pattern did not match Otto's private restoration work. The anglaise was too clean. The screw heads were polished in a modern style. And the worst part was the mainspring. It was not simply broken. It had been cut. A controlled cut, made with a jeweler's saw, designed to create intermittent failure after winding. I looked up. "When did your grandfather die?" I asked. Meredith blinked. "Why?" "I need to know when this watch last worked correctly." She glanced at Malcolm. "My grandfather died in 2019. The watch was in his study safe. It was working when the estate inventory was prepared." "And when did it stop?" Edward answered before she did. "Sometime after that. The thing is 100 years old." I kept my eyes on Meredith. "When did it stop?" She said, 2 months before the will contest was settled. The room changed temperature. Only metaphorically, but everyone felt it. Malcolm Price cleared his throat. "Mr. Mercer, you were called here to discuss repair, not estate history." I turned the watch gently in my hand. "This is estate history." Edward's expression hardened. Meredith took one step closer to the desk. "What does that mean?" "It means someone replaced key components after the watch was inventoried. Someone wanted it to appear damaged, incomplete, and less valuable, and someone cut the mainspring so it would run briefly and fail in a way that looked like age." Edward laughed once. This time, no one joined him. "You got all that in 2 minutes?" "No," I said. "I got some of it in 2 minutes. The rest I already knew 14 years ago." Meredith stared at me. I closed the case. "I need to take this to my shop." Edward stepped forward. "Absolutely not." Meredith did not look at him. "What do you need?" 3 days. I will document everything before touching a screw. I will photograph the movement, compare it against the original Weiss service notes, and tell you what can be restored." Malcolm's eyes sharpened. "Original service notes?" I looked at him. "Yes." "Where would you get those?" I placed the watch back into the velvet box. "From the man who taught me to service watches like this." Nobody spoke. Meredith closed the box with both hands. "Take it," she said. Edward turned on her. "Are you insane?" "No," Meredith said. "I am tired of men telling me not to look too closely." That was the first time I saw who she really was. Not rich, not elegant, not tired, angry, but trained from childhood to make anger look like posture. I signed a receipt for the watch, sealed the box in a padded transport case, and drove back to Bridgeport without turning on the radio. At the shop, I locked the front door, switched the sign to closed for service, and went to the drawer beneath my bench. The old black notebook was wrapped in a gray cloth. Geneva, 2010 to 2011. I had been 26 when I wrote most of it. Back then, I was working in a restoration program connected to the Weiss archive. I was not supposed to be the best apprentice. I was an American, a widower's son from Connecticut. My French was awkward, my German worse, and the Swiss technicians believed patience could only be inherited through mountains. But Otto Weiss liked me. He was 81, thin as a clock hand, with white hair, clear eyes, and a temper that could make senior watchmakers forget how to breathe. He taught me because I listened. Not politely. Completely. He said most young men wanted to master time. A watchmaker had to learn to obey it first. The Harlow watch had come through Otto's bench in 2011 for private authentication. Not restoration. Authentication. I remembered because it had arrived with a sealed estate letter and an American lawyer's request for verification. At the time, Otto had asked me to write the secondary observation notes. I opened the notebook to February 2011. There it was. Weiss and Phil's Minute Repeater Perpetual Calendar, 1904. Private American Commission. Engraving. To E. H. From A. H. Unique identifying feature. Micro-engraved succession code beneath moon phase bridge. I froze. Succession code. I had forgotten that part. Not because it was unimportant. Because I had never understood its importance at the time. I read the next line. Code corresponds to Private Harlow Family Trust Annex. Mechanical authentication required for release of founders' reserved shares. I sat down. I read it again. Then again. The watch was not just a valuable object. It was a key. Not physically. Legally. A mechanical identifier tied to a trust annex. If the watch was declared damaged, incomplete, or unauthenticated, the founder's reserved shares could be treated as unverified property and distributed under default estate provisions. I did not yet know who benefited from that. But I could guess. That afternoon, Lily came home from school with glitter on both sleeves and a report that a boy named Mason had said clocks were just old phones. "He is wrong," she said while eating crackers at the small table in the back room. "He is allowed to be wrong. He said watches are useless because phones tell time." I looked at the disassembled Omega on my bench. "Phones tell time, watches remember it." She thought about that. "Can I use that in my science project?" "Yes." "Will I have to cite you?" "No." "Good. You are not a book." I smiled. After dinner, after homework, after I read her 2 chapters about a girl detective with poor impulse control, Lily fell asleep with one sock on and one sock somewhere only the universe knew. I went back downstairs. I photographed the Harlow watch for 6 straight hours. Every bridge, every screw, every jewel, every damaged edge, every tool mark. At 1:13 in the morning, I found the succession code. It was almost invisible under the moon phase bridge, engraved so lightly that it appeared only when light hit the plate from the side. HTA 19047. I compared it to Otto's notes. Exact match. The watch was authentic. The replaced parts did not destroy its identity. They only hid it from anyone who did not know where to look. At 1:28, I called the only lawyer I trusted. Jonah Bell. He had helped me with Caroline's medical debt after she died. He was 55, blunt, kind in ways he disguised as irritation, and specialized in probate disputes because, as he once told me, death made people honest only by accident. He answered on the 6th ring. "Someone better be dead." "Not yet." "Caleb, I need advice." "You need sleep." "I have a watch tied to a trust annex and possible estate fraud." A pause. "I am awake." I explained what I could. Not everything. Enough. Jonah told me to bring the notebook, photographs, receipt, and transport documentation to his office at 8 in the morning. I did. He read quietly for 20 minutes. Then he removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "You understand what this suggests? That someone altered the watch to suppress authentication? It suggests more than that. If the Harlow founders' reserved shares required mechanical authentication and the watch was falsely declared unauthenticated during the estate settlement, then any distribution based on that declaration may be challengeable." "How much are reserved shares worth?" Jonah looked at the photocopy of Otto's note. "Depends on the foundation structure?" He turned his monitor toward me and pulled up public filings. Harlow Foundation, Harlow Biomedical Endowment, Harlow Family Voting Trust. He read, then he stopped. His eyebrows lifted. $28 million at the time of settlement, he said. I said nothing. That is not a watch problem, Jonah said. That is a felony with gears. What do I do? You do not accuse anyone directly. You document the repair. You complete nothing that changes evidence. You give Ms. Harlow my card. You tell her I handle trust disputes involving authenticated property. You do not put any theory in an email. Can I tell her to call you? Yes. And Caleb? Yes. If anyone offers you money to forget what you saw, call me first and the police second. I drove back to the shop. For the next 2 days, I did what work demanded. I did not dramatize. I did not guess. I documented. I measured the replacement lever. I checked the mainspring cut under magnification. I compared screw polish patterns to Otto's notes. I found a tiny trace of modern synthetic lubricant under one bridge that would not have been used before 2018. That told me the tampering happened after Meredith's grandfather died. Not before. On the third morning, I called Natalie Pierce and told her the watch was stable enough to be reviewed, but I wanted to deliver it personally to Meredith. Meredith asked me to come at noon. When I arrived, she was alone in the library. No Edward. No Malcolm. No assistant. The room felt different without witnesses. I placed the transport case on the desk. The watch is authentic, I said. Meredith closed her eyes. For 1 second, her face looked much younger. Then she opened them. And the damage? Intentional. She did not sit. I laid out the photographs in order. Original components. Replaced parts. Cut mainspring. Tool marks. Succession code. Otto's 2011 notes. When she saw the trust annex line, she put one hand on the back of the chair. My grandfather always said the watch knew where the family was supposed to go, she whispered. I waited. She looked at me. I thought he meant sentimentally. Maybe he meant legally. Her mouth tightened. Edward pushed the settlement. Malcolm said the watch could not be authenticated because it no longer ran properly. The reserved shares moved into the general family distribution. Edward received most of them because he had majority claim under the default provision. I objected but I had no proof. I handed her Jonah Bell's card. You should call him. Is he your lawyer? He was. Now he is the lawyer I would call if someone tried to steal time from me. She looked at the card. Then at the watch. Then at me. Why are you helping me? I thought of Otto. I thought of Caroline. I thought of Lily asking whether a watch was a book. Because machines do not lie, I said. People do. She called Jonah before I left the driveway. Within a week, Jonah had brought in a forensic trust accountant named Renata Cho. Within 2 weeks, Renata had obtained the archived estate filings. Within 3 weeks, they discovered that Malcolm Price had submitted a valuation memo stating that the Harlow watch was incomplete, unauthenticated, and worth approximately $72,000. That number was absurd. A fully authenticated Weiss and Phil's 1904-minute repeater perpetual calendar tied to a Founders Trust Annex was worth well over $2 million. But the watch's market value was not the real point. The memo had triggered the default distribution. Edward Harlow gained control of the reserved shares. Then, Through a series of loans against those shares, he financed failing real estate deals in Florida, Georgia, and Nevada. Malcolm Price had signed the legal opinions. Edward had paid consulting fees to a company controlled by Malcolm's son. By the time Jonah told me the scale, the number had climbed above $31 million. Meredith filed a petition in Stamford Probate Court to reopen the estate settlement on November 12, 2024. The civil complaint followed in Superior Court 4 days later. By Thanksgiving, the Connecticut Attorney General's office was reviewing the charitable foundation implications. By the second week of December, federal investigators were asking questions about wire transfers. I returned to my normal work as best I could. Watches came in. Watches went out. Lily lost another tooth and accused the tooth fairy of inflation because $2 did not buy what it used to. The shop smelled like brass, coffee, and winter coats. Then Edward Harlow walked in on a Friday afternoon. December 13th, 3:08 p.m. I remember the time because the regulator clock had just chimed once, late, because I had been meaning to adjust it all week. Lily was at school. Mrs. Alvarez was downstairs. I was alone at the bench. Edward wore a black overcoat and leather gloves. He looked thinner than he had in October. Angrier, too. Men like Edward do not always look frightened when they are frightened. Sometimes they look offended that consequences have manners enough to arrive. "Mr. Mercer," he said. I set down my loop. "Mr. Harlow, you have caused my family a great deal of trouble." "No, I found a damaged watch." He smiled without warmth. "You know exactly what you found." "Yes." He reached into his coat and took out a folded cashier's check. He placed it on my bench. I did not touch it. $1 million, he said. "You sign a statement that your interpretation was mistaken. You say the markings were inconclusive. You say Otto Weiss's notes were ambiguous. You say whatever Jonah Bell tells you not to say." I looked at the check. $1 million. Lily's school. A house with a yard. Health insurance that did not make me check the mailbox like it was a threat. A future without calculating which repair could wait. Edward saw me look. His voice softened. "That is not an insult. Mr. Mercer, that is a door." I stood. "No." His eyes hardened. "Think carefully." "I did. You have a daughter?" The room went quiet. Not silent. Quiet. The difference matters. In silence, there is nothing. In quiet, there is everything you are trying not to do. Edward continued. "Lily, yes, 8 years old. She attends St. Agnes Academy. She leaves through the side gate on Thursdays for art club. Your neighbor picks her up when you are busy. Mrs. Alvarez, is it?" I walked around the bench. Edward took one step back. "Do not say her name again. I am only saying you have responsibilities." I stopped 3 feet from him. "My responsibility is why you should leave." He looked at me. For the first time, he understood I was not a small man just because I had a small shop. He picked up the check. "Last chance?" "No," I said. Edward left. I locked the door behind him. Then I called Jonah. Then I called the police. Then I called Lily's school and told them no one but me was authorized to pick her up until further notice. By 5 p.m., a detective had taken my statement. By the next morning, Jonah had filed an emergency notice with the court. Edward's attempt to bribe and intimidate a material witness changed everything. Judges do not like being lied to. They like it even less when someone threatens a child to keep the lie alive. The hearing was scheduled for January 21st, 2025. Stamford Probate Court. A gray morning. Cold rain. I wore my only dark suit. Lily stayed with Miss Alvarez. Meredith sat at the petitioner's table with Jonah and Renata. Edward sat across the aisle with two attorneys. Malcolm Price sat behind him. He looked old in the way men look old when reputation leaves before the body does. The watch sat in a glass evidence case in front of the judge. Small, gold, quiet. The object that had brought all of them there. I testified for 54 minutes. Jonah asked me to explain what I had seen when I first opened the watch. I described the replaced calendar wheel, the cut mainspring, the modern lubricant, the tool marks, the micro-engraved succession code, and Otto's 2011 notes. The judge asked me one question directly. Mr. Mercer, in your professional opinion, was this watch intentionally altered after the death of Edmund Harlow? I looked at Edward, then at Meredith, then at the watch. Yes, Your Honor. Edward's attorney tried to suggest I was overstating my qualifications. He asked where I had gone to college. I told him I had not. He asked if I had a graduate degree in mechanical engineering. I told him no. He asked if I considered myself an expert in trust law. I told him no. Then Jonah stood and handed the court-certified letters from Otto Weiss's archive, from the Swiss Horological Registry, and from two museum conservators who had reviewed my photographs and notes. All three agreed with my findings. The attorney stopped asking questions. Renata Cho testified next. She followed the money. Not emotionally. Precisely. The false valuation? The default distribution? The loans? The consulting fees? The related party payments? The transfers to Edward's development entities? The payments to Malcolm's son? The missing $31 million did not vanish. It walked. Renata showed the court every footprint. Meredith testified last. She did not cry. That made her stronger, not colder. She spoke about her grandfather, about how he gave her the watch to hold when she was 12 and told her that responsibility was not the same as ownership. About how Edward and Malcolm had told her she was being sentimental when she questioned the estate settlement. About how she believed them for a while because grief makes doubt sound reasonable. When she finished, the judge took a recess. No one spoke in the hallway. Edward stood near the window, staring at the rain. Malcolm sat alone on a bench. Meredith came to stand beside me. "Are you all right?" she asked. "I have had better mornings." "So have I." A small smile touched her face and disappeared. Then she said, "Thank you." I nodded. Before I could answer, my phone buzzed. "A message from Mrs. Alvarez. Lily wants to know if court has snacks." I showed Meredith. For the first time all day, she laughed. Quietly, but completely. The judge returned at 3:42 p.m. She found sufficient cause to reopen the estate settlement, freeze Edward's disputed assets, remove Malcolm Price from all Harlow Trust roles, and refer the matter for disciplinary and criminal review. She also found my testimony credible. That word stayed with me. Credible. Not rich. Not titled. Not degreed. Credible. Sometimes a man spends years thinking he wants to be seen as extraordinary, only to realize the word he needed was trustworthy. 3 months later, Edward Harlow agreed to a settlement that returned control of the reserved shares to the Harlow Foundation. He surrendered several properties, withdrew from the family trust, and faced a criminal proceeding related to fraud and witness intimidation. Malcolm Price resigned from his firm before he could be forced out. His law license was suspended pending review. Meredith became sole chair of the foundation. The watch returned to her grandfather's study, repaired, but not polished. I refused to overpolish it. Some scratches are not damage. Some scratches are testimony. On a Sunday afternoon in April, Meredith came to my shop. Not with assistants. Not with lawyers. Just herself. Lily was sitting at the front counter, drawing a dragon wearing a wristwatch. Meredith leaned down. "That is a very responsible dragon." Lily looked up. "He is late because he has wings and thinks that makes him special." Meredith nodded seriously. "I know people like that." Lily liked her immediately. Meredith set a small box on the counter. "I brought something for your father." I looked at her. "You already paid the invoice." "This is not payment." Inside the box was a photograph. Black and white. Geneva, 2011. Otto Weiss standing beside a younger version of me at the restoration bench. I had never seen it before. My hair was longer. My face was thinner. I looked tired, serious, and entirely unaware that my life would become something I could not yet imagine. On the back, in Otto's handwriting, were 6 words. Caleb listens before he touches time. I sat down because my knees had forgotten their job. Meredith said, "The Weiss archive found it with the service packet. Otto's granddaughter thought you should have it." I could not speak for a while. Lily came around the counter and leaned against me. "Is that you, Dad?" "Yes." "You looked confused." "I was." "Are you still confused?" I looked at the photograph, then at my daughter, then at the woman who had brought an old piece of my life back across an ocean. "Less than before," I said. Meredith smiled. She did not stay long. At the door, she turned back. "The foundation is opening a small restoration fellowship next year for young tradespeople, watchmakers, instrument makers, mechanics, people who know things universities do not always know how to teach." That sounds important. "I want to name it after Otto Weiss." I looked at her. She held my eyes. "And I would like you to help design it." I thought of the joke she had made in October. I thought of the building she said she would name after me if I fixed her watch. I thought of Edward's check on my bench. I thought of a gold pocket watch ticking in a dead man's study, telling the truth because people had forgotten how to hear it. "I can help," I said. Lily raised her hand. "Can dragons apply?" Meredith said, "Only responsible ones." After she left, I closed the shop early. Lily and I walked to the harbor with sandwiches wrapped in paper. We sat on a bench and watched boats move through the cold blue water. She leaned against my side. "Dad?" "Yes?" "Do watches really remember time?" I thought about Otto. About Caroline. About Meredith. About all the people who had mistaken quiet work for small work. I think they remember what people are afraid to say. I told her. She considered that. "Then we should listen." "Yes," I said. "We should." That night, after Lily fell asleep, I went downstairs and stood alone in the shop. The regulator clock ticked against the wall. The Omega waited under its glass cover. The carriage clock sat open like a tiny brass house. On my bench lay Otto's photograph. I turned it over and read the words again. Caleb listens before he touches time. For years after Caroline died, I thought my life had become smaller. A child. A shop. A narrow street. A bell over the door. A routine built from school lunches, repair tickets, bedtime stories, and invoices I prayed would be paid on time. But I understand now that small is not the same as meaningless. A watch is small. A signature is small. A cut in a mainspring is small. A child's hand in yours is small. And sometimes the smallest things are the only ones strong enough to carry the truth through time. So here is my question. If you had been standing in that library, holding a broken watch while powerful people laughed at you, what would you have done? Would you have corrected them? Would you have walked away? Or would you have done what I did? Let the work speak first. Tell me in the comments. I read everyone. And if this story made you think about someone quiet in your own life, someone who fixes things, carries things, remembers things, or protects others without asking for applause, hit like, subscribe, and share this story with them. Because some people do not need to tell you who they are. They leave their truth in the work. You only have to look closely enough to see it.